Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Or at least that's what I thought when I first started this episode. Now I know that hell hath no fury like someone who is pissed off at a woman that they previously scorned. So, that was this week's episode of Game of Thrones. It involved mainly the trial of Tyrion Lannister. He was being put on trial for a crime that he's been imprisoned for the past few episodes, which is supposedly murdering the king, who was his nephew. The king was a selfish and idiotic little turd, but he was still the king, so that's a big no-no. There were other plots this time around, namely in the form of Stannis finally perhaps gaining some traction, and Daenerys, who is still lording over that one city she conquered, and she is getting complaints, which was the last thing that she expected to get. So I guess I'll talk about that first. Well, we finally see the infamous Iron Bank. Now, this was previously established in an earlier episode, this place. Tywin mentioned being massively indebted to the Iron Bank, to the point where they were basically broke. But here's the thing. Why can't you just pay someone at the Iron Bank? And he's like, well, the Iron Bank is the Iron Bank. You don't pay the Iron Bank. You don't just make arrangements with someone at the Iron Bank. It's the bank. And she said, well, there are people running it. And he just kind of, if memory serves, he kind of dodged that question. And I raised the query, well, since you are the family in power right now, why don't you just impose a tax? And don't tell me that they are already imposing taxes, because if they are, then A, they didn't make that very clear, and B, that should have been brought up in the conversation. Why don't they just raise a tax? I mean, I know it's going to take a while to pay off the debt they have because of their gold shortage, but I don't know, I'm just digressing massively at this point. That's the problem with me, I digress. But Stannis asking for essentially a loan from the Iron Bank, A, shows that he's in dire need of resources. I mean, he doesn't exactly have a whole lot of guys left relative to other factions after his defeat at the end of Season 2. So him asking for a loan gave us a chance to get to see this Iron Bank, which the guy who runs it, one of the three guys who runs the Iron Bank, I don't think this was him, but he both looked and sounded like Mark Gatiss from Sherlock. He plays Mycroft and co-writes Sherlock. So I don't know, that I will say that was kind of distracting. But basically the gist of it was them trying to convince them to give Stannis a loan, even though there isn't really a whole lot of assurance at this point that he can pay it back. So what I thought was actually a pretty bold move is Liam Cunningham's character shows them his hand, which basically has had the upper part of the fingers basically completely severed, so his hand looks like that. And he says, this is what Stannis did to me when I was condemned for something, I don't know, speaking out or something. And that shows you that he doesn't just talk about paying you back. He will pay you back. So, pretty convincing argument, apparently, because the way they end the scene, we're meant to assume that it works, that he's going to get this loan, so maybe Stannis can finally get back into the game. The second plot was probably the least interesting of all of the storylines, in my opinion, because because honestly, it's kind of making Daenerys out to be kind of a moron, which, if put on her own, I don't really think she would last very long. I mean, yeah, she's had some good moments, but there's a reason she has all of these advisors. It's because she has no semblance of strategy, and when she went against Sir Barristan's orders a few episodes back about maybe we shouldn't crucify the nobles of this city. Maybe we should actually show a little bit of mercy, be the bigger man, or woman in your case. And she's like, no, 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 I'm going to answer justice with justice, or I'm going to answer injustice with justice. And she crucifies all of the nobles in the city, like upwards of 100-something guys. 160-something? I'm trying to narrow it down, but basically, there are a lot of nobles that have been crucified and are still hanging there. So she's basically getting complaints on her throne. The first one was kind of irrelevant. It was just kind of the one of the fringe detriments to having dragons, and is that they need to feed. So they have been feeding on livestock, and she was basically getting a complaint from this goat herder, who was basically saying, your dragons singed and burned my livestock. And she's like, oh yeah, I'll pay you back three times what they're worth. He's like, oh, thank you. So that basically established what she would have. It basically establishes her default method of resolving all of these petty issues. Is put a little cash in their hand. They can forget about this. But then some nobleman's son comes in and says, my father was one of the guys who built this pyramid that you're sitting in, and he was one of the noblemen who are currently crucified. And she's like, well, the noblemen were oppressing themselves over the slaves. And he said, yes, but my father spoke out against that, and he was not heard, and he was crucified just because he was a nobleman. So yeah, that really hammers home the outright stupidity of that decision that she made a few episodes back. Like, crucify everyone! Well, isn't that a little too general of a sentence? I mean, some of these guys could be innocent. I mean, it's not as black and white as you make it out to be. No, crucify everyone! I don't care! Crucify everyone. They're all criminals in my mind, even though I haven't exactly met any of them in person. So painting these citizens of this city with that very broad brushstroke, with two very broad strokes, black and white. I mean, to her there was no gray area when she conquered this place, so of course she would not consider the ramifications of her actions until it was too late. And again, this is what Sir Barristan was getting at. And maybe you should have listened to him, because I don't want to make any assumptions, but just by the looks of him, he's been at this a little longer than you, honey. So forgive me if I think that you will probably lose some of the people's confidence in the next few episodes. I went on a kind of tirade there, so it wasn't terribly interesting. But at least it actually called out the mistake that she made, and maybe show that things aren't necessarily as black and white as she makes them out to be. I mean, maybe this will finally open her eyes to the realization that, yeah, maybe it's not as simple as just liberating an entire colony or liberating an entire city and rallying all that support. Maybe it's not as simple as you make it out to be. So hopefully this can lead to more interesting stuff with her character. But the big focus of this episode was the trial. And at first, it's kind of your standard courtroom style procedure where they have a bunch of witnesses, and really this kind of hammered home that, yeah, Tyrion is smarter than everyone else, but he has also backstabbed a lot of people and made some enemies. People don't like when they are exposed as frauds or or shown up by the little guy, as it were. So he has all of these guys. There are all of these witnesses who are basically fabricating, or not completely fabricating, because they're taking real events that we've seen in the show, like Julian Glover's character, the guy, the monk guy with all the chains, who's carrying the chains. I still don't know what's up with the chains, but he basically says, which basically translates out to this little guy stole from my shop. He stole a bunch of poisons from my shop after having me wrongfully imprisoned. And here, this necklace we found at the scene of the crime is one of the poisons that was stolen from my shop, and we have basically been able to gather that it was used to poison the king, without a doubt. So yeah, it basically goes like that for a good 10-15 minutes until Jaime actually tries to talk to Tywin during an intermission, and right here we finally get some clarity as to why Tywin is letting Lena Headey's character basically run wild in her accusations. Really, the only person who might be there for no ulterior motives. Well, I can't really say that, because Prince Oberyn I'm beginning to like. Actually, he's charismatic, and you're not quite sure how he is going to accomplish his goal, because he says he wants to slaughter everyone who bears the name Lannister, and he says he wants to kill Tywin, but he is serving as a judge next to Tywin. So he's clearly biding his time, and a little more clarity on his character would be appreciated, considering that he is some new blood that has been inserted into the show in recent episodes. So yeah, I actually like him. I like him now. I didn't at first. But yeah, we've back to when Jaime is talking to Tywin. Jaime is like, if you spare my brother, your son, I will leave the Night's Watch and be the guy that you want me to be to carry on your legacy. And yeah, I will do whatever you want. He's like, and without even missing a beat, his dad's like, okay, done. So you really learn that, yeah, Tywin is giving off the impression, at least to Jaime, that he's not in charge with this trial, that Cersei is. But what I really love about this guy is that he always has a plan in the back of his mind. He always has an ace up his sleeve, or at least he has thus far. So him basically manipulating the scenario to suit his own ends. Really, man, what a clever prick. Now we know where Tyrion gets his brains. But the scene following, they bring... I'm sure I'm spoiling this. I am spoiling this, but they bring Shay in as a witness. Now, first off, who let Shay in? Who called her in? Who brought her back and said, you have to testify against your former friend with benefits? I don't know. I would have liked to, I'm using this word a lot, I would have liked a little more clarity as to why she is here, how she is here, who called her here. But the point is, she's here to testify against Tyrion, and she to the shock of the audience, basically forges a fabricated account, or an over-exaggerated account of her experiences from first meeting Tyrion all the way until Tyrion assassinated Joffrey, or supposedly assassinated Joffrey. So to see this kind of betrayal in such a public place, what does Tyrion do? He flips out. He goes on this long rant, and he demands a trial by combat. By far one of the best scenes we have ever gotten out of Peter Dinklage, in my opinion. I mean, that the tension and the emotional drama just built so well. Not just in terms of his performance, but in terms of the whole atmosphere of the room and in terms of everyone's performances. How Tyrion is seemingly throwing his life away just to tell off all the people who have wronged him. I mean, he has caught almost nothing but crap ever since the end of season 2, because he has a scar. He got no credit for leading the attack to defend the capital from Stannis. He was demoted by his dad. He has been pushed around by his dad. He has been accused by his sister. And now all of these people who he previously outsmarted are coming back to bite him. So, oh, and there was also that unwanted marriage to a teenager. And now he's even catching flack from the person who claimed to have loved him, the person who he has been with since season 1. So seeing that feeling of betrayal and sadness slowly but surely turn to screaming rage, was beautifully acted by Tyrion, by Peter Dinklage. My God, that was a great scene. I mean, it started off fairly standard. The whole sequence started off, like I said, as this standard courtroom drama, but then it built and built and built until this big climactic conclusion, this big outburst, and then the episode ends. Yeah, I have to see what happens next. I mean, this episode started off fairly standard. I mean, I thought this was just going to be, okay, just another series of talking scenes. Again, still good, but not really reaching the dramatic levels of what this show has previously shown to be capable of. But very well acted, especially toward the end, by Peter Dinklage, Charles Dance, Nikolai Coster-Waldau, Stephen Delane is back. Emilia Clarke, she's as good as she can be in the very dumb position that her character is in right now. But yeah, very good episode. The beginning was honestly perplexingly average, but that build up and the whole episode progressed. This was a script that truly got better as it went along. So, yeah, the courtroom scene, the pacing was fairly fast. I mean, in real life, a courtroom scene probably would have taken a lot longer. I mean, there are whole movies based around courtroom scenes. Like To Kill a Mockingbird, half the movie's in that courtroom. And half the book. So, well, probably a third of the book. I digress. Very good episode. Of course, it has whet my appetite to see what will happen next. So, until then, Valar Morghulis.